Now, it says here that my next guest, Joe Lauria, is an investigative journalist. Well, that's like saying that Cristiano Ronaldo is a footballer. Cristiano Ronaldo is the greatest footballer of all time. And Joe Lauria is the investigative journalist. He was formerly with outfits like the Sunday Times, like the Wall Street Journal, I think like the Washington Post, but he is now the editor-in-chief of a site which I visit every single day. Consortium News is the outfit, and Joe Lauria is its editor-in-chief. And he joins me now. I'm very glad to say for the second time in 2 days. Joe, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us. I had a talk with Caleb Mopan earlier about the political situation in the United States. I might get your views on that later in this interview, but let's start with the war. It is my contention that no longer is there a serious military or political analyst in Western countries any longer able to claim that Ukraine are winning the war. Is that what you think also?
Well, George, as we discussed yesterday, the coverage of the war has declined dramatically, and it's accompanied by more and more voices in the West, led maybe by Henry Kissinger, of all people, and by various columnists in British and American newspapers, and the news itself that is no longer pushing as strongly the idea that Ukraine is winning the war. They haven't dropped the idea that Ukraine could still win it. That's the idea behind all of these enormous amounts of weapons, or at least the money that's been allocated in the United States. Billions, $50 billion or more to Ukraine for weapons and other aid. The idea of still pushing Russia out, not only of what territory they've gained since the February 24 invasion, but also to vacate Crimea and all of Donbass. And that would be a massive task and could risk a nuclear exchange, frankly, between NATO and Russia. If it got to that, it's unlikely that they will be able to do that in Crimea. So I think you're right. I think I shy away from reporting in our publication from events on the ground day to day, because it's very difficult to believe either side. When both sides say something, I think that's probably true. Like when that Black Sea ship was sunk, the Ukrainians said they sunk it. Then the Russians said it sank. I knew it sank. Then the Ukrainians said they used missiles, and the Russians said it was an accident. So I'm back to square one, not knowing exactly what happened there. But yes, you have to look at the Western media to see if they're shifting about the idea that Russia was losing and that Ukraine's winning. And that there has definitely been this shift in the last few weeks. That's new.
So in that case, all of this expenditure from the US alone, $50 billion, you add in the others, you're closer to $75 billion worth of aid. All of that has therefore been wasted. It's fallen into Russian hands. It's been destroyed, or it's now on the dark web, where you can buy a Javelin missile for $30,000, coming in the hands of a terrorist to an airport near you, coming in the hands of a criminal to a bank robbery near you. But the damage to our own economies by the economic warfare which we have launched against Russia, that all of this has been for naught, less than naught. That therefore begs the question, are we ruled by idiots?
Not sure. It might be so. They're looking at short-term, what they thought would be a short-term goal, the ultimate goal here. And Joe Biden spelled it out on at least two occasions, not only in Warsaw in that speech, but in the February 24 press conference when he was asked why would new sanctions do anything when they didn't deter the invasion. He said the sanctions were never about the invasion. It was about getting the Russian people to rise up and to see what he has done. So it's about overthrowing Putin. And I think that they thought, although I understand the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury tried to tell the Biden administration not to sanction the Russian central bank. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that. So there were probably some discussions in the U.S., but they settled on the idea of these massive sanctions, which would not have been possible without the invasion. And I firmly believe the U.S. set a trap for Russia. They wanted them to invade so they could launch this economic war, the information war, which they could take down various channels that they always wanted to take down, like RT America, for example, and to move on to a disinformation board to try to attack private, dissident, small media such as Consortium News and others. They should have foreseen that, yes, the ruble kind of collapsed within the first 2 weeks, but now it's one of the strongest currencies in the world. I understand it's the Russian central bank has had to take measures to weaken it because it's gotten too strong. So Russia has found with China and India and other countries that are not going along with the Russian sanctions, they're creating a whole new system, a commercial system, a monetary system, a financial system that has split the world in two. And the United States and West have kind of cut their noses off, trying to spite their face. It is certainly boomeranged. Anybody, any consumer in Britain or the United States or Western Europe can feel it, whether they blame Putin or not. Yes, the invasion was necessary for the sanctions, and the sanctions is what has caused, when you cut off all of this economic activity from Russia, trade, particularly fertilizer, agricultural goods, and coal, and whatever else you're going to try to show off from Russia, that's going to hurt the West more than Russia. They're sufficient in fuel and food. Those are the two basic things you need to survive as a nation, where a lot of Western countries are dependent on others, on Russia to some extent as well. Joining with China, the whole world is not behind this sanctions regime, and the West is being hurt. Are they idiots? You know, you would think that they wouldn't be idiots if they were in the positions they're in, but they certainly haven't thought it out very clearly because they're suffering. Again, maybe they're doing that thinking that it would bring Putin down, but so far it has not.
It has not. It looks unlikely to do so, and therefore it was an exceedingly bad call that the Western leaders have made. And the only question then is, are the public in Western countries idiots and going to allow people who make a call that bad to continue in office with renewed mandates and so on? But maybe on another occasion we can look more deeply at that. I want to take you where you were headed in that last answer. It is staggering in a way, but nonetheless a truism, that when people in your country and mine talk about the world, they're really talking about us. They're really talking about what they call the West, although there are plenty of people in the West who are suffering from all of this and who never agreed to it in the first place. But even if you included the population of the whole West, North America, the European countries, and Australia, you are talking about tops 15% of the world's population. The other 85% of the world's population, Africa, Latin America, Asia, the Middle East, the Russia and China, Thailand and Indonesia. I mean, I could go on. 85% of the people of the world live there, not here. How can we shake ourselves of what seems to be an irremediable problem of imagining that the world is us?
Well, you said that Western leaders think that the world is us. I think that they think it's them. In other words, the Western leaders, not even the people of the West. It's really their own interests. To overcome that, what you've asked George would mean overcoming centuries of historical thinking about the role of the West in the world and in world history. And that goes back to the beginnings of the first Western empires in the 1600s or even early in the 1400s. Africa, Latin America, and then Asia. And the West, ultimately led most predominantly by Britain, dominated the entire world. And the world is still recovering very much from that. And one reason is that because colonialism really didn't completely end, did it? Yes, they lowered the flags in all these countries and put up a national flag, but the economic system, the military relationship, intelligence, they have not stopped meddling and keeping an eye. The Francophone countries, you see French troops in the Sahel, going into Africa all the time. Britain is involved around the world with their intelligence services. The United States has bases all over the globe. And they talk about imperialism in other countries. The U.S. has bases in over 180 countries. It's going to take a long time to overcome a sense of the people who are in power with these kinds of military bases that they are the center of the world still. But 30 years or more has passed them. There was a non-aligned movement from the 1950s with Tito and NASA and Suharto. And this movement is gotten new life again, by the way, after the Russian invasion and the U.S. sanctions against Russia, and the BRICS came around in the 90s, and the West has always had an arrogant attitude towards these groups, and I think that history is passing them by. They don't recognize, they being the leaders of the West, the United States primarily, don't see that China is not the China of 30 years ago, and Russia is not the Russia of the Yeltsin age. China is soon to be the most powerful economic country in the entire world, if it isn't already. And the United States, of course, knows they're in a competition with that, but psychologically, they still think they're superior. There's a kind of racial aspect to this without question. And even within the white race, the Anglo-Saxon sphere is the one that really has the power. When you see the way France was treated with the Australian submarine deal and whatnot, they are grasping onto the last vestiges of that power that they had. I mean, the British Empire and the follow-on American Empire, which run jointly, basically with Britain. They will not grasp that the power they once had is slipping them by, mostly because of the rise of those other countries that they once ruled, China being predominantly the one, and India, now a huge country with a huge middle class as it never had before. They want to continue to live in that space where they were the power that ran the world, and it's going to take a lot to dislodge that. And we may be seeing the very beginnings of not this change, as it for decades now, maybe in the West, that it's slipping if they realize that their economic war against Russia has failed, especially because of what we're saying, because the former colonial countries are not joining with the West against Russia. They are trading with Russia. They are accepting Russian goods. They're helping Russia survive this economic war, predominantly, again, China doing that, but also India and Africa and Latin America. They got to wake up and realize they must be one player amongst many in the world and not the predominant power. When you look at the Pentagon and their global dominance documents, where they still say that there should be nobody in the world should challenge United States supremacy. This goes back to Brzezinski, to the Project for New American Century. This thinking exists in the Biden administration. Clearly, Biden comes out of that old era. We're going to need a whole new generation of politicians in the United States and Europe. I don't see them on the horizon, but it's got to come. They've got to realize the world has changed, and the U.S. and Europe can survive in it very well if they just cooperate with other countries and don't try to be the top dog anymore, which they are clearly not. At least they're losing it. They have only military power left. And that's a recipe for very dangerous times if the U.S. feels they need to exercise that power to maintain the fiction that they have, that they're still running the entire world, or that they deserve to anyway.
I didn't interrupt that long answer because it's amongst the best answers I've ever heard. If I could put it in a tin, I'd distribute it across the world. Joe, finally, tell us how people can follow your work, which is, as I said earlier, literally peerless. How do people follow Consortium News?
Well, very simply go to Consortium News, one word, or consortiumnews.com. consortiumnews.com. It was begun in 1997 by Robert Perry. We're still going strong 27 years later. Thank you, George, very much for having me on your show.